Okay, so for those of you in Zoom and those of you in the room here, it is my great pleasure here on day 2 in Bryant Park B to introduce Bob Ellington. He is my guest, and he's, as again, I said, integral part of this event. He has a very interesting and I'll call it involved application that he has written over the past 10 years and improved over the past 10 years. And he enlisted my help in some of this, do some things that he could have done with his eyes closed, but he was just too busy. So I appreciated him trusting me to be his clone as close as I could be. Without further ado, I'm going to let Bob share. Bob, why don't you go ahead and let me stop sharing here. Okay. Okay. Stop share. All right. There you go. All right. Start sharing. Should be showing up here in a moment. There we go. There we go. All right. Well, first, thanks for all of you for coming. When you get into these custom built tools that, you know, by title really don't mean anything to the rest of you and everything, it's very much appreciated that you came in to see what I had to show and talk about. What I'm presenting is not something to attempt to sell to you or to say you need to do this, or, you know, really here's how you do it. I'm showing you something that we built and some of the work that we did back behind the scenes around it, to give you ideas to take back for things you could do similar that are more important to your processes and everything for it. This is a system we call functional service management. The reason we have a system called functional service management is that from NASA's perspective for our contract that we were dealing with, they began asking for all these different data elements that they wanted to keep up with around a change request or around a work order. And it was starting to become a rather large list of fields. And one of my tasks was to modify out, stay out of the box as much as possible and do very minimal modifications. And then when someone's asking you to add 50 to 100 fields, you're starting to go, that doesn't belong, add it to the change. It doesn't belong, add it to the work order. And so we ended up having conversations about what was possible and so forth. And we then put in a big NASA project where they provided funding for us to go through a full process. And so we went into a 2-year NASA 7120 project. And from NASA, the 7120 project defines your entire process from inception all the way to deployment, and all of the government gates that you've got to go through to get your ATPs to, you know, keep moving forward with everything. And the 7120 process was designed to build rockets. And then they have a variant of it called 7120.99 that is used for building software. And so we followed that 7120.99 process to go through and use all of the funding and everything to produce this stuff. And this is a list of some of the requirements. And I mean, just some. This is just a smidgen of the requirements that we had for this project. We actually had a spreadsheet containing all of the level 1 requirements, broke down to level 2, broke down to level 3. We actually are all the way down to level 5 on some of our requirements to get detailed out on some of this stuff. And there were probably in the neighborhood of about 600 lines of requirements in an Excel spreadsheet, when you had it broken out that way for it. And so part of this was to create a solution that would provide an automated framework to facilitate going through strategy activities, design activities, and transition activities. The strategy activities are scenarios where if you say, hey, I want to implement this new network concept over here, then you got to get with the service management people and determine the thing they want to do. Does it align with our strategy that we've laid out for doing these kind of things? Yes or no? And so it was an oddball approval process. It doesn't happen on everything. It just happens occasionally here and there. And it can happen midway in the CRQ, it could happen in the front. It could happen right before you deploy. It didn't fit anywhere from a normal approval process. So then the other piece was around design activities. Well, their design process that they like to work with is they get all this information about their designs, they get their drawings, they figure out their bill of material data, cost sheets, put it together in a big package in a PDF, and then go get approvals on that kind of stuff. Well, none of that really fits well in the out-of-the-box change management system. And so it became obvious that we needed to do something that kind of ran on the side of it. And as we got deeper into it, we also began to realize that this was not just an SRM tool that's, you know, kind of scenario. I have a request, build my one change. This was also a project management oriented type system. So if I have in a request to redo the way we do land networks at every center at NASA, you don't do that under one change request. You got 15 centers and facilities. You want 15 change requests. Well, the nice thing about this is it becomes that wrapper to put all 15 together. So you build the one main change request, and then you do add-on change requests. And I'll get to some of that in a minute. Another big piece of this was the enhanced task scheduling on it. I don't know how many of you use, I figure most of you probably use tasks. You change templates with task templates underneath it. We have extensive use of tasks. A lot of these change requests come out and they'll have 50 to 100 tasks on them. And to use the out of the box way to go in there and manually edit each one of those tasks and set the schedule start and schedule end date and know that you're setting it correctly, that's the way the tool's designed. That's painful. And so that's the auto schedule task feature. That's a piece I'm going to show you in this afternoon. If you come back for the auto schedule piece, I will show you that on it, but it's part of this big project that we did it. The other piece was to integrate with the out of the box tools. And that's where I was saying is we did it more as a wrapper around the change and the work order piece. And so that integration was there. It was also, we got into some automation for it, and I'll describe some of that as we go through, based on, you know, tasks or change requests when they complete and so forth on it. This was also to provide consolidated reporting. So you got the 15 change requests. Well, now we can report it as one item at the FSM level. We don't have to report 15 individual. We can just say the FSM's still going, kind of thing. And so that's some of what the requirements were on it. And this is where I was explaining the 7120.99, where we pulled the process for software in order to use it to implement all of this. Okay. A good eye chart. This is the entity relationship diagram that describes what all we built in order to build functional service management. No, I don't expect any of you to read it, even if you got up here close, and it wouldn't make sense. But a big piece right in the middle is the FSM request attributes form, and that is the main driving form for the FSM piece on all of this. And so everything is interconnected with that. There's a whole bunch of side tables to support different menus and pull downs and workflow automation, trigger data, and that kind of stuff, as well as all the relationships to out of the box forms, the change requests, the work order, the tasks, et cetera, on it. This is a little bit easier to read. I brought it down to just the the main pieces that would be relevant there. But you begin to see in the request attributes some of the data elements, and I mean that's just some, that they wanted to be able to keep up with. When you get into that much information, you don't want to be adding that to your out-of-the-box forms. You want to do something on the side and connect with it. And so as you see, some of that comes over here, and you can see that FSM request number added in the change in the work order. Minor customizations, trying to do as little as possible. Adding a field over there gives you that tie between the data and that kind of stuff. This was a slide that we used as part of our 7120 process. We had to do meeting after meeting and presentation after presentation as we designed and laid this out. This was one before we even had any forms built or anything. This was early designs and so forth. And what we recognized is that sometimes an FSM should make a change request, sometimes it should make a work order. And it was what type of work that was going to be done that would make the difference to go over there. So if you needed to just do a study or a standard ROM scenario, that belonged in the work order side, because you're not changing anything. You're just giving the customer kind of the best guess of what it would take to do something they want to do. If you're really doing an add, a delete, a move, or a modify, that really should be a change request. And so that's where we began to define some of that flow and structure of where things should go. And as you see here, as things come through, if it's an internal request, meaning that, so let me take a step back. We run as a tier 2, tier 3 organization. Tier 0, tier 1 is at the enterprise service desk level. And so customers can place a request there, but sometimes you can have an internal request that our service manager says, we need to replace, this level of Cisco's with, a higher level of Cisco's. And so it's whether or not it's an internal request versus an enterprise service desk request can make a difference coming through. And so then after that, it comes in and it does a staging moment inside the FSM record. There's some additional questions that people then need to answer. And then that will help determine exactly whether or not we're going with a work order or going with a change request, and what work order and what change request template to be used for that. And then a lot of this other is about the piece where strategy assessment is involved, and the DCS down there, that is where I was talking about, that they take all the data out for their design and go present to the customers. That's the DCS's design cost schedule for a project that they're going to do. Okay. So this is the main attributes tab of the functional service management form. And this is some of the fields that they began asking us to try to keep up with on the change in the work order. Now, I know these fields, some of these are not meaningful to y'all in any way, but they were very relevant to NASA, especially for their networking contract and what they're dealing with on it. But we built out the full ability to have, as you see a tab up there for work detail. You see one that's a tab up there says ESD questions. That's an enterprise service desk. So they're doing kind of an SRM style request from the customer. The customer puts in, there's a bunch of questions to get asked as you're picking a service, and they put in their answers. We bring all that data down. We show the question, we show the answer so that people can read it. And then you see the relationships tab, and then, there's just a lot going on in this project. Okay. So this is the statuses. One of the things that I began to recognize from just our normal customer usage of change and incident and task forms, you give them the ability to manually change the status and they will do it. And they'll do it when it shouldn't be done. And then it's a pain to get back, especially if they've closed something. You can't undo that most of the time. So I decided in my design of this project here that we were going to control the statuses by the workflow that was happening in the system and not let the users manually set them ever. So all the status flow that happens in here, it's either triggered by a button to move something forward, or it's triggered by something else. And we'll get into some of that in a little bit. So some of these statuses have, for lack of a better term, when I was designing it, status reasons for them. So like when you get something new, it starts out in a status of pre-check. Well, that means it's waiting for somebody to answer some of those additional questions that you got to have answered so that we can figure out what template to apply. And so once they answer those, they'll click a button that says next stage, and it'll validate that they've done everything they're supposed to, and it'll then take it to that pre-check complete state. And then it'll wait for an escalation to trigger to go say, now go actually build the change or the work order for it. We knew we needed a pending status, but the pending events that we had was that we were awaiting funding ATP. Well, when we first laid this out, they had to reach out to the enterprise service desk to receive funding ATP approval for it. And so we have a task in there that says we're starting funding ATP. Then they go to the ESD manually, do their request for funding ATP. When they get their approval, they come back and close that task, say we got it. And then that triggers back through and we come back out of that pending state. The other one was the strategy assessment piece. I mentioned that earlier, that if somebody says they answer certain questions about strategy a certain way, it immediately goes into strategy assessment. And that service manager has to look at it. And it's waiting then for him to click a button to say, we're good. Or for him to reject it, and then somebody goes back and changes the answers to the questions and then moves forward with the process. And so that's what that one is about. And then when you reached complete state of the FSM, you either had that it was canceled or it was successful for it. So if you have one work order associated with it or one change request associated with it, and you cancel that work order or cancel that change, we in turn automatically cancel the FSM. Okay. And you see our other statuses over there. You've got active, you have error, but honestly right now, I've got nothing ever writing to error. So I never have a status of error. We didn't, even though we had it as an option in the list, we couldn't come up with an automation definition that would throw it into error for it. There's another one in there called in service. So the scenario here that we used to run into when we were just doing everything as a change request is you get to the end of the change request and you either had to make the end of the change request when you're dealing with the enterprise service desk be that I have now deployed the thing you've asked for, close that change request so that it could trigger back to the ESD and tell the customer, hey, it's done. But then you've got a lot of other things you do after that. So other tasks to do to document the thing you did for the customer and all these kind of things. It's not relevant that you document it all before you actually make it live for the customer. That's stuff you can do post implementation, right? And so we got around that scenario of them having to build a post implementation work order to do all the documentation after doing the change request, to now having a individual task that is categorized to say this is the in-service task. And when it gets completed, we trigger in service, and then I notify the enterprise service desk at that point that your product's finished, it's there. So now they can take their surveys and say, yep, I got what I wanted and so forth. And then your change request stays active, your FSM stays active, and all of those post-implementation things are still in it. And so you get to see that the full real process staying together in that change request that way. So here you see when you're in that pre-check point, I've highlighted the 4 main fields here that are used to identify the change or work order and its template on the request. It's all about the service, what action you're doing, where's that work location it is, and then the source is important. There, the SRM means it was done internal to our system. If it says ESD, it came from the enterprise service desk. It's meaning the customer asked for it as opposed to a service manager. And so the reason those have different templates to them a lot of the times, because some of those ATP approvals don't need to be in the one that the service manager is doing. It's all part of his prepaid work package that he's got, to replace equipment over a period of time. He doesn't have to go ask for additional funding and so forth. So he has a shorter task list on his change request than the same request from a customer for it. Okay. And so here you're seeing some of the options here for a service of WAN corporate routed data. Here are some of the action types in the upper left up there that you would pick. And then as you see over on the right, you begin to see the different options that are in a table that's a form that's the FSM service action to template. And I've highlighted a particular one and then showing you below what it does. So if you have a WAN corporate routed data, the work location is enterprise. That's the scenario where we're going to do this at all centers, right? And an add, then you see in the lower section, the primary template name, as well as the module that's involved. So it tells you this is going to be a change request, and here's the template name for it. And of course, when you pull all that in, we can get the template ID and all of that that's needed in order to kick off and build a change request through the change infrastructure change create form. Okay. Any questions so far? All right. So after they have picked all of that, they filled in all the required fields and they hit the next stage button, it goes into that pre-check complete that I was talking about. This is now waiting on that escalation to run to take some of this information and go build that change request. So you see some of the same fields you would see in a change request. You got the summary and you got the notes. You've got the customer full name information up there. You've got a customer requested date down there for when they want it. We use that to populate there's a date field on the change form. We populate that. That one gets a little tricky on us sometimes because when the ESD request comes down, the customer wants it tomorrow. By the time we get the request, it's 3 weeks old because it took them a while to go through their approval process. So that get over here in the dates in the past, it won't build the change request because the date's in the past. Only scenario I have found to potentially identify an error on the thing, but I provided the ability to dance around that and still leave whatever the customer requested as his date. That's supposed to be fixed and you can't change it. And but then allow it to then move forward on it. As a service is requested, and for our example that I'm showing here is the routed data piece, we at the service level can identify a set of questions, service requirements that need to get answered before as part of this project. So this is, think about this as being more fields that they would have needed on the change request, but it's different fields per service. So it never would have worked being just fields added to the change request on it. And so it didn't even work here. So I had to build a form behind the scenes that held a list by service. Here are the questions that should be asked. And then for this particular FSM, take all of that and create records to say, go answer these questions. And so we can dynamically add new questions, and they're there for the next FSM for it. And I give them the ability right here, instead of them having to drill into a remedy form, you just highlight it, you see the question, you can fill in the answer and click the update button and keep moving. So everything's, they keep them contained within the FSM. Another piece that we had in some of our requirements was around keeping up with statistics. They're real worried about how long it takes to do certain things and how well they're doing against all of that. Built all this functionality and found that they never look at it. But I built it. It's in there. And so as you see over here on the left, you see that there are 3 different service categories over here. That is Cat 1, Cat 2, and Cat 3, operational Cat 1, 2, and 3 on the task record itself. And understand that we have, sometimes there can be 2, 3, or 4 different tasks that are categorized exactly the same. So I roll it up by category to roll up the estimated days of how long it should take to do that classification of things. Not that that's what it is for each one task. It's a roll up of all the tasks that have that same categorization on it. And then I give you a breakdown based on whether it's a design, a post-implementation, or a transition task, and say, here's the different points of the effort. And that almost equates to the change request having the 3 different phases. It almost equates to that. But we found that there were some design events that would happen in the implementation phase. So that's why the categorizations was how we rolled this up. It's not really a matchup to the phases in the change request. And then on the other side, and I'll show that on the next one, this is to gather the information on the task as it actually happens. Notice that there's a difference here between actual days and complete days. So those of you that are familiar with the task form, you know that there is an actual start and actual end. And the out of the box allows you to just manually set it. In fact, you can put the mouse in it, hit enter, and it gives you exactly that moment in time. And get in the other one, hit enter, that moment in time. Depending on how quickly you do it, it can look like you did this in 1 second, but you had it open as a task for 35 days. But that's when the guy fills in that information. So they wanted to know what people were putting in for actuals. And then the best guess we could do for complete, there's actually a different date field on the task that identifies when it moved from stage to assigned. And then a different field that's grabs the date when the task goes to complete. And so we use those 2 to identify complete days on it and calculate that out and provide that information. And you can see right here, our actuals were 4.8, but the complete was 42. So that's why you got to think about on those actual days. You're not really getting good information unless you have gone in and put your own automation on the task form to prevent people from doing it and setting it for yourself. So then the relationships tab over here, this is where you see the information about the change or the work order or the additional ones on it. And as you get on an individual change, I show you all the tasks, but they didn't want to see it the way it is on the change form, where you've got task groups and tasks within a task group. They just wanted to see the tasks. They wanted a quick, I want to see the tasks. I don't care about the rest of it. And so that's why I have that sort order field. It's kind of in the middle, a whole bunch of ones on it. That's because we have phasing turned on. And so for the different phases, that's what the sort order is for, to help you see all the design phase, then the business approval, and then the implementation phase pieces for it. So then I mentioned about having additional changes or work orders. And so off of that relationships tab, there's a green button down there. You click that button and it pops up this supplement dialog. And here you basically do the same thing you did when we were at PreCheck. You're picking a service, an action, and a work location to identify a template. And as you can see here, I'm picking something that's different than the routed data here. It could be that I'm doing additional routed data things at different centers, and I need it that way. That's fine. That's what you would pick. In this case, they need a routed data, but they also need cable plant work in order to accomplish what they need. So you can actually involve a different service and service line in the process for this. And so you just pick the service, the action, the work location. It identifies the template for you. You hit submit, and it'll create the additional change request for you. And you can see here, I'm showing the 2 different change requests on that same item. And so now you're in that project management scenario that I was talking about, where the FSM is managing this whole project. And these 2 seemingly unrelated change requests that really are related now are related, and you can see them together. Any questions on that part?
Are the statuses always going to be the same, or would you have one in draft and one in?
That's a good question, because in this scenario that I'm laying out here, the first change request needs this work from cable plant to be able to complete their change request. So you would expect that the add-on change request for the cable plant to go do their work and complete. So it'll go all the way to completed on that change request before you have activated the additional tasks beyond that point on the first change request. And so, yeah, one can finish before the other. One can get canceled. You know, if they got over there, well, you know what? You said you needed some fiber between this building and this building. Guess what? We just did that last week, so we don't really need to do the change request, right? So you could cancel it, that kind of thing. But yeah, that is part of the automation that happens back there to figure out what status should this FSM be in. It is when one of those change requests go to complete, it checks to see if I have anything else related to this that's not complete yet. So if so, stay active. Only scenario that is an issue, and you can see down near the bottom, there's a task for the add-on that says in service. So the piece I did not account for in my automation was that 2 different change requests would have in-service tasks in it. So that's a manual process that they've got to pay attention to remove the in-service from the ones that they think they're going to complete before the main one does. So if there's only one in-service task. So all I got to do is go cancel that in-service task, and it won't trigger the in-service event. Okay. So there were, as I was saying, there were minor customizations that we did to the change form. So over here on the details tab, we added in the FSM ID. If it came from the enterprise service desk, you see the other 2 fields to identify that the change came from the enterprise service desk information as well. But in general, for the FSM to work, I needed that one field, and I added the button so that you can go from here to the FSM if you were in the change for it. On the task form, we decided to add the FSM number to the tasks to make reporting easier, so that we could build a report at the task level, and then if we just need to add the FSM stuff to it, we've already got the number. It's easy to get there. We don't have to go from the task to the CRQ just to get the FSM number to then bring in the FSM data. I could just go straight from the task to the FSM data in a report level. Added a custom field here called list color. What I did with that is, you know, when you see things in a list, you can go in there and say, pick an enumerated field, and show this row red for this value of the enumerated field, show it blue for this. So I created a field, an enumerated field called list color, and I actually put values in there. Normal just means leave it like it is, leave it showing black, you know. And then I had green, and I have red, and I have yellow. Well, that was the text. And then I began other things that they wanted to be able to tell about it. I needed to yellow highlight something that had red text and things like that. So I actually have this huge list of values that are readable that say, you know, red text, yellow highlight, or just red text, you know, that kind of thing. And so then that is used in the FSM form itself to show that task as being that color and having the yellow on it and that kind of stuff as a highlight. So, and as I mentioned, we went back on all of our task templates and we categorized every single task that could come out of this, because those categorizations we use to trigger automation in the FSM piece. Not everything there triggers an automation. Some of them, like this one right here, doesn't trigger any automation when the task gets started or completed on it. But one that had in service on it, or one that had funding ATP on it, triggers an automation event, can change the status of an FSM for it. You can see here we carried over the FSM service and service line, again, for reporting purposes, just to make it quicker and easier to report, because we had a lot of reports around tasks. They want to know what was the service and the service line behind it that's going on. Well, it's a lot easier if you've got it right there on the task than it is to go join it up to go find that information. And so it was really easy to pull over and just fill in. It doesn't get changed. Basically, I just put a simple filter on the task form. So when this task creates, take the FSM ID and go look that up real quick. That's it for it. Another piece was the estimated days. As you saw in my statistics that we were calculating, you know, estimated days information. So on the task, I needed to identify the estimated days for this task. Okay. And in the task template, I was telling you before, at the task template level, we categorized everything. So on basically all of our change templates, with all of these tons of tasks on it, every single task has a categorization on it. And at the task template level, I added the estimated days so that we can pull that information and say, here's the default estimated days to do the work on this. Okay. So at the task level, I've got this field that I've come to use on almost everything. And Phil will tell you that this is one of the ones that he really likes. One of the things that I do, it's a display only field called custops, which stands for custom operations. And I provide a menu to it, but you notice I leave it, it's not a hard menu. So that field is set up where if you modify it and save the record, it recognizes, hey, you modified something, and triggers immediately looking at filters, you know, triggers workflow. So a lot of forms that we all build custom, as well as some of the out of the box, just simply modifying a record in general can trigger workflow that does things, checks things and stuff. So sometimes that's all you need to do on something, is you just need to trigger it. You don't want to modify any real record or real data or anything. So I can come in here and put the letter X in it, hit save, boom, it triggers all the workflow. Doesn't save anything, it's a display only field, right? But notice here, I've got certain options up here. And so that is, I've got particular filter workflow behind the scenes that are looking for, hey, was my custops equal to auto schedule, for example? If so, go auto schedule this task. Again, that's the piece I'm showing you later this afternoon, the auto
So
schedule.
do you have a run if on every filter that looks at that value to see if it's an X or to see if it's one of your selected values?
So I don't even have anything that looks for it if it's an X. That's just simply just anything that's got to modify in general would kick off because of because of using X or Y or Z or anything. That's like I say, is just to keep you from having to stick a letter in the notes field and then go get rid of it and save it again to, you know,
Well,
kind of thing, right?
If there are things, so if you select one of those,
Mhm.
all of your filters are going to fire that don't have a run if.
Correct. Any filters that would modify would also fire.
Okay.
Yes.
Because
And-
I've been in a situation where, oh geez, if I put in this special value,
Right.
I don't want these three things to fire because they're going to screw everything up.
Yeah. And in that
So I have
case,
to have a workaround.
in that case, you modify the workflow and put a run if and say, and where custops is not equal to,
I've
block.
used go-tos
Right.
on the sequence in order
Okay.
to bypass all that stuff.
and you can do that a lot in your custom stuff, right?
Okay.
But some of it, like I said, is out of the box things that just fire because something that's
Right.
modified.
Right.
And they're you don't want to go modifying all those because you did a custom.
Oh, but you
Right.
might want to bypass them.
Yeah.
It's going to change something you didn't really want to change.
Right.
And what's an example workflow you would want to run?
So let me take you back here for a second. So one of the things I have on here that I'm running for this scenario here is auto schedule. And the auto schedule takes some of this data off this task and it pushes it into a service. It says, go calculate for me what my schedule start and scheduled end dates should be. And it pulls all that information right back in from that service.
So you're going to kick some data off to a service, get some data, modify this record, and then you do want it to stay.
Yes. Yeah. And that's just this particular example.
Okay.
But I've got other things that happen. Sometimes I put in a custop that says, send an email to the service manager about this. Well, I could trigger it manually with the custop. I could trigger it through automation with an escalation, trigger it because some other filter, you know, something else modified and go, hey, write this in custops, hit save. And so now it'll trigger that event. I don't have to write it to say, if the custops is this, or it has that, you know, I can just do the one thing, just make it right to custops. And then the custops just says, filter just looks as, is custops equal to this? Do this, you know, kind of thing. And then I could end up over time having 5 or 6 scenarios that need to do that. Well, rather than write them all to go do exactly the same notification or whatever, just trigger the custops.
And if you were to do a rescheduling, is the rescheduling modifying data somewhere else, or are you actually putting like some data fields on this particular record?
So it's actually the schedule start and schedule end dates that are out of the box fields for that auto schedule piece.
Okay, so if you actually kick that off, you're going to call a service, you're going to get some values back, and you're going to have some active links to set some fields.
No active links. It's filter.
Okay, so it all happens server side.
Yeah, it all happens as a filter. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And like I say,
Well, yeah, you got a filter modifying the record.
so one of the things you might want to look on some of your out of the box forms. They have a field that BMC uses quite often called Z1D action. Okay, it's exactly the same concept. That is a display only field, but I didn't want to use their field because they got all kind of special things happening around that Z1D action. And I began to look at it and go, this is going to be complicated because I'm going to run into the scenarios Barry's talking about that I might accidentally trigger something I didn't mean to because I had a value in Z1D action. Not that I had one of their values, but I had something in it and it makes it go do something I didn't want it to do. So by doing my own custom field for doing the same concept over here, I stayed out of the out of the box workflows.
Good thinking.
Okay.
Well, Bob makes it sound easy. Oh yeah, just put this in here and stuff. Trust me, when you've got filter guides, calling other filter guides based upon the value of custops, it's complicated, but it works and it's data driven. So you don't have to go and create all those discrete workflows.
And
Like
I'm
we-
saving that question for how many filters are associated with it.
It depends on what form I'm in and what I'm doing.
Well,
Yeah. So let me take you through the next part. So another thing, I needed to be able to handle that automation, or I was talking about the task or change request or whatever. I'm down to 1 minute. I'm down to 3 minutes.
Now you're down to 2.
Great. So what I did is when those events happen, I put a filter on them to write a sys action record. You'll find there are some sys action forms that are out of the box. That's where I kind of took the concept. And the idea is so you write an entry into this form, and then some escalations trigger it to go process along. And eventually your last thing is you delete the record, and you write a filter for on delete to go do whatever and push it wherever you want it. So that way this form stays cleaned out all the time on it. As you can see here that I got certain sys actions, the task status change, the CRQ status change, the work order status change. That's the main sys actions happening. But from an FSM sys action, the task got assigned, the task got completed, it got canceled, CRQ got created, it got scheduled, it got completed, et cetera, on through there. All of those eventually push back to my FSM form to the admin tab and trigger a bunch of actions over there for it. And this is where I've got a big list of sys actions, one of which is a custop that just says sys action, which says go do whatever the sys action is. Go back through another set of guides around sys action values. And that's where the automation starts setting all of those statuses for it. And over here, I've also built it where there's only one filter that triggers on submit or modify for that custops. And it pushes into a guide. Every other filter around it is in the guide. That way don't have 50 things looking, oh, these are the modify ones, these are the submit ones, figure out which one's which. Everything's in the guide.
From a texting perspective, this use of the custops has streamlined a lot of things, pinpointing down issues between that and the sys actions. We really streamlined a lot.
And so
I know this.
your question, Barry, was how many?
Yeah.
Here's all of the filters in my custops guide on that form.
oh, I was expecting one.
But some of those are actually other guides.
Yeah, well, this is where I was, I'm running short on time and I went ahead a little bit. One of my custops is sys action. It says, look at the sys action field. That goes to the sys action guide and you see all of these. And so some of these sys actions can trigger another action. And so you got to get one of the things that you begin to realize is that when a guide triggers off and you've got that display only field, well, it goes looking through, finds its filter that matches that, happy day. And then you go in that filter, you say, well, I need to make it do another custops. So you can set the custop. Well, it doesn't go back and rerun the guide. It goes from there to the bottom. So you got to put those additional filters down below that. And now you're really kind of making more of a function that's going on when doing that. But it'll all run through the guide the one time to end. And so if you're changing one of those display fields in a filter that's in the guide loop in the first place, to look for the change, you need to make sure that's further down in the guide. So as we went through that big 7120 process, we ran 253 end user tests. This is the users logging into our system using it. 253 scripted tests. Some of them were unscripted. We turned them loose and said, just go do something. We want to see what happens. We had 192 of the tests that passed. We did have failures. I mean, you expect on something that big to run through it. We resolved every single one of them. You notice there, 29 of them were script errors, where we wrote you a script that said, go do this. and we made a typo. We told you to look for something. I had to.
Put that in there.
I had to. That was you, Barb.
Yes, I know.
That was your side.
It was me.
And so in conclusion, as he was saying, this is very highly data driven. It's highly automated. And I've reduced customizations to out of the box forms as much as possible, as you saw there. For all of that.
So for upgrades, it's a lot easier. You don't have to worry about
Right.
what happened
Yeah.
to the out of the box.
Yeah, upgrades have become pretty simple. I did a VRUG presentation on how I handle things on upgrades for the out of the box forms and all that kind of stuff. I think you have the video out somewhere, so if somebody wants to see that sometime on it. It's just the way I chose to do it, and we did. I think it was from version 8 to 9102 that we did, and BMC was, expecting every customer to call them. We did it in a weekend. BMC were calling me. They want to know how I did it.
They take it, you did overlay when you put the fields on.
Everything's an overlays, yeah.
I didn't
But-
overlay that,
But the big key for my upgrade
but I understand.
that really worked well. First off, as you saw, I had everything in custom tabs. That I had custom fields. I just added a custom tab to the form. That's a very big key part. The other is you go into the Dev Studio, you say copy this view to a new view,
Yep.
then you delete the view, delete the original view. That puts you back to whatever out of the box is, and then just go now and add that tab to the new view. It's all back that quick.
Wow, okay. Good.
All the fields and everything, you just add the tab and all the fields come with it.
Yep.
Any other questions? I know I'm slightly over.
Well, I gotta tell you, thank you, Bob, for presenting. This was something that, yeah, that's, these are the people that appreciate the hard work that you've done here. And so it's very impressive. Thank you.
All right, thank y'all.
I appreciate it.